Welcome to my review for the 2010 remake of A Nightmare on Elm Street. Now, if you've been following my reviews for these films over the past few months, you'll know that I quite enjoyed some of the earlier ones, but after a certain point, I stopped enjoying them. There's just far too many mediocre sequels and weaker efforts. I've definitely been treading water recently, just desperately trying to tiptoe my way to the end of the series so I can put a bow on it and say it's done. I certainly wasn't looking forward to this final film because even die-hard Freddy fans usually say that this isn't a very good one. The other night when I watched this, I deliberately watched it really early in the evening so I'd have time to watch at least one more movie after it. I didn't want the Nightmare remake to be the last thing that I did on this particular day. That's where I am right now with The Nightmare on Elm Street mentally. It's only worthy of being the undercard to another movie as far as I'm concerned. Now, I will say that this watch that I did the other night, there were three disadvantages going for it, which are not the movie's fault. So firstly, I watched the film on Netflix. Now, I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like films on Netflix play a little bit too quickly in terms of the frame rate. Maybe there's another term for it that I'm looking for here, but if I play a film on Netflix and play it on a DVD player side by side, I swear to God, I reckon the version on Netflix is going to finish quicker because they play the movie slightly too fast. It's subtle, but I swear it's there. There were several times during watching this film the other night that I was conscious of it and it was pissing me off. I usually try and avoid watching films on Netflix if I can watch them elsewhere. I made an exception in this case because it's Nightmare on Elm Street Part 9 and I didn't really want to spend any money on it. The only reason I even keep Netflix is for the Netflix exclusive TV shows that I will occasionally watch, but for movies, I try and avoid that particular streaming platform. The second disadvantage this film had the other night is the fact that I already knew all the twists and reveals and stuff just from listening to other YouTubers over the years. And the third disadvantage is the fact that I'm watching this in 2021. You know, this is a long abandoned reboot. It didn't even have a single sequel. Had I watched it in 2010 at the cinema, maybe psychologically I would have been more into it, thinking, oh, this could be the start of a big long-running thing. I don't know. Now, I don't think I need to go into the story much today. This is a complete reboot of the original film. It even has a new Nancy. Freddy is committing his first kills here again. But certainly, if you've never seen any Nightmare on Elm Street films and you're watching this review, I would say just go out of the video and go and watch the original film. Don't watch this one before any others. So after all that, did I enjoy it? Well, no, not really. So I'm going to go into the positives first today because it's a much shorter list. So I guess I'll start by saying that I did at least appreciate the tone that this film was going for. I much prefer it when A Nightmare on Elm Street goes down a dark path in terms of its tone rather than a camp, silly one like we've seen in some of the installments before this one. That's not to say that I want to see loads of stuff about pedophilia. I'll come back to that later on in the review. But in theory, anyway, I like the fact that this film at least tries to give us a darker take on Freddy Krueger that we've not seen in a long, long time. I also enjoyed the opening of the film in the diner. I thought that was a nice, creepy way to start, and it was well executed. I like diners like that, you know, with the booths along the wall, whether it's real life or in movies. And there were fragments of things throughout the film in terms of the effects that I thought were quite well done. So one example would be when Freddy's head comes through the wall. I thought that was very, very good. I want to talk a little bit about Rooney Mara. Now, I'd heard that she was absolutely awful in this film. And I did ask myself the question just before I put the film on, is she going to be as bad as people have been saying? I thought she was okay. Now, if you spin it in a certain way, therefore, you could call this a positive thing, that I thought she was okay. I'm stretching a bit here because I've not got that many good things to say about this film. I'm going to call it a positive. She was okay. I've seen her in one other film before this, which was The Girl with the Dragon's Tattoo, I think it's called. It's a long time since I saw that now. I thought she was okay in that, and at best, she's average in this, but it's better than being terrible, I suppose. There's some logic there. She definitely tried to play the role of Nancy in a very kind of low-key way. I thought she was very good in some scenes. In others, I would have liked a bit more energy from her. I've seen worse final girls, though, in all honesty. One thing I will say is that her sister, Kate Mara, is a much better actress. I actually look forward to watching Kate Mara in stuff if I know that she's going to be in them. I can't say the same about Rooney Mara from the two films now that I've seen her in, but she wasn't completely terrible. But I'm totally out of positives about the Nightmare on Elm Street reboot. That's all I've got. So in just a second, we will start to go into the negatives. So for my first negative, I guess I'll talk about the pedophilia angle, seeing as I've already teased you with that. Teased you with pedophilia, that sounds completely wrong. But this film spells out in big capital letters the fact that Freddy Krueger is a paedophile and touches kids up, as well as being a child killer. The earlier films didn't do this. They just sort of let you make your own mind up as to just how evil Freddy was. And personally, I never imagined him to be that much of a pedophile. Maybe he touched one or two kids slightly inappropriately, but not to the extent that this film outright comes out and says he does. I mean, there's literally one scene where Nancy is looking at photos, a big, thick pack of photos, presumably of her in all sorts of nasty situations, and that wasn't my personal interpretation of Freddy from the original film and onwards. So I'm just not sure this was the right way for this film to go. I saw a film called The Lovely Bones a few years ago, which was about a paedophile slash killer who was the nastiest piece of shit you've ever seen in a movie, and it was delightful getting to see him get his comeuppance at the end of that film. But that was a one-off film about a killer whose name I can't even remember right now. Freddy Krueger is a horror icon everybody loves, and do we really want to explicitly come out and say that he's this evil person who does all these horrible things to kids? Wasn't it better that it was just a kind of possible thing that is never completely 100% confirmed? I don't go to conventions and things, but I mean, can people still dress up as Freddy and go to conventions and stuff with the reboot now out? And we've had, it's no, I personally wouldn't have gone down this road of what they did in this film, but that's just me. My next negative would be the fact that there's lots of things done in this film that we've already seen in the earlier ones that are just repeating themselves for repeating themselves' sake. So the hand in the bath, I mean, it doesn't even try and do anything different. It's just a complete copy of what we see in the original with Heather Langenkamp. There's another scene where a body's getting dragged in the school corridor. I mean, it's not even trying to do anything different. It's just, can you not at least come up with something original, and then the ending. The ending is one of those sting in the tail situations that's just thrown in there for one last scare, probably because somebody in an executive position running the movie decided that there needed to be one last scare, regardless of whether the story demanded it. And in this case, I mean, I was just thinking, what? No, not a fan of that at all. While I'm on the subject of that, though, that reminds me that I totally forgot to mention the fact earlier in my positive section that Connie Britton is in this film. She's the one who ends up the victim of that final scare. She is a really good actress. I've seen her in a lot of TV shows, mostly things like Nashville and American Horror Story, and another one with American football. I forget. Usually TV shows. I've never seen her in any films, I don't think. So it's kind of ironic, I guess, that the one time I do see her in a movie, it's this frigging movie. But yeah, she's very, very good. I'd like to talk about the relationship between Nancy and her would-be boyfriend in this film. I forget what his name is. They have this developing thing where they slowly like each other more and more as the story progresses, and then they eventually have this kiss, which is meant to be all sweet. The trouble is they have absolutely no chemistry together, and it's really awkward watching the moment where they eventually arrive at this kiss. It might not necessarily be the actor's fault here, it could be the script as well, but it would not surprise me at all if these two actors did not really hang out that much offset during this film. That's just my gut instinct. I'm usually the first to praise a good story in a horror film if it's done really well. Anybody who watches a lot of my reviews will often see that, but this was not one of those cases at all. They just had a really awkward chemistry together. The parents in this film have an interesting situation in a flashback where they chase Freddy Krueger into some kind of factory, which could just as easily be the factory from RoboCop. I'd like to know how long they were chasing Freddy before the start of the flashback, because this factory place looks like it would be some way out of the nearest town, and this version of Freddy doesn't look like the sort of guy who could run for a very long time. But anyway, he ends up hiding in this room, and one guy throws a Molotov cocktail through the window, and Freddy burns to death. But I just don't buy that the other parents wouldn't dob this guy in. You know, I'm certain in my own mind that if this was a real scenario, at least 1, 2, even 3 of those other parents would protect themselves by going to the police and coming clean. I didn't believe for a second that every last one of these parents would keep this secret. I really didn't. And then when this film is really getting going and Nancy's starting to get to the bottom of the whole thing, and she starts to confront her mother, we get all these annoying bits of dialogue where the parents refuse to sort of spill the beans, and they're saying things like, oh, we were just trying to protect you. I've seen this sort of thing in films quite a few times. It always annoys me. It's like, you've been found out, now cut the crap and just spill. So yeah, that was another thing about this film that annoyed me. But I think I've just about come to the end of my big long list of complaints. I've not much more to say about this, in all honesty, so I'm going to pretty much look to wrap things up now. I did not enjoy this film. It is absolutely a failure of a reboot. I do hope one day that there is another good Nightmare on Elm Street film, and that it's done better, and then it leads to a whole new series potentially, but this certainly wasn't it. It was a disappointing, tedious experience to get through. So let's get to the bag of terror. There's probably more terror in that bag than there was in the entirety of this reboot, and let's find out what sort of score we've got. Well, actually not that much terror, just one bloody axe, one and done, a bit like the Nightmare on Elm Street reboot series, but I will be back soon with a rankings for this series, and that will just about finish things off for me. I have enjoyed somewhat getting into Nightmare on Elm Street over the past year or so, at least in terms of the earlier films. A lot of the later ones have generally been quite disappointing. I've not yet decided what my order is going to be for the rankings, and it won't necessarily correlate with the amount of axes I've been giving out for each film, because I've had time to digest some of those films for quite a few months in some cases now, so some of the scores may have gone up or down in certain cases. It'd be interesting, so I'll hopefully get that video out next week. But for now, I will bid you adieu. Goodbye.